to our next business item, I do want to ask Trey to give us a brief update on public safety and the concerns that we have.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Chief John Thompson's here. I've asked him to come tonight. And as he approaches the podium, we want to acknowledge that it has been a very trying start to our year. As a former police officer, it is unimaginable when you lose one of your own. A lot has been said, and we're approaching this week when we will have the funeral of Officer Haran, who was a tremendous hero for our community. But I do want to take a quick moment as a city manager to acknowledge the professionalism. Myself and Assistant City Manager Harold and our communications strategist Eric Chilton went out to the scene that day. And I've got to tell you, as a police officer, as I was a police officer, I was a supervisor, I was a commander, I saw a tremendous amount of professionalism. I saw people with extreme emotions because they had lost one of their own, but at the same time, everybody from those who were non-sworn police officers to those who were crime scene investigators. We oftentimes don't think about those folks who have to go into the spaces that nobody ever sees, and for them to have to do their professional work, and it's one of their own family is again, it's unimaginable. But I want to take a moment to acknowledge their professionalism. In the following days, unfortunately, we've had other incidents that people have lost their life in our community. One of the things I've asked Chief Thompson to talk about was to give you all as counsel, but also to talk to our community about the context of those incidents and remind the community of the importance that we have to work together. As obviously from the city manager's perspective, and you all are tremendous advocates. I do want to take a moment for anybody watching. Someone did ask me this: what does our city council think about, and does our city council ask about the violence that's happening? And I want to tell the community that yes, our city council does. They're very engaged and they're very concerned. So I want to thank you all for that. But also we need help from our community and our community partners. So Chief, if you wouldn't mind, give us an update on where we are. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. Just wanted to take an opportunity to update you that we obviously had a difficult end of last year, losing an officer, and unfortunately over the 2 weeks that followed that, we've lost 4 other members of our community. And I know when we lose an officer, that seems to gain a lot of attention in the community and the public. It seems to be a story that gains a lot of attention. And I just stand before you today to say that we will honor that officer Thursday at a service, but my heart is just as heavy for those 4 individuals that lost their lives and those families that are suffering, along with the Haran family and along with the police department. Unfortunately, we've seen that we're not immune to violence. And we have members of our community that are not immune to violence. And it's not acceptable. And I can tell you that even after losing Officer Haran, that we have not stopped working tirelessly for the community to address violence. We were fortunate enough to be able to take the individual who killed Officer Haran into custody within a few hours. We've also done the same for 2 additional cases that have happened in our community. And one thing I want to highlight that City Manager Davis brought up is the fact that in one of those instances specifically, it was the community that stepped forward, that worked with the police officers on the scene, those detectives working the case, that resulted in the identification and arrest of the suspect in that violence. Now, I think that's great. That's wonderful. We need the community to do that. What I want to do is ask the community to let's work together to prevent that violence from occurring in the first place. I think we've made great strides over the last few years, especially coming out of COVID, connecting back with with the families not only impacted by violence, but the communities that are impacted by violence. There's a number of things that we're doing to work to address that. I have Chief Alston here in the room who's coordinating with, hopefully starting next week, that we will be going out into the communities, engaging again with the communities. I know when I first took over my position as chief, I made a call to the communities saying, we need your help. We need programs. We need nonprofits. We need community-based organizations that will help fill the gap with the police department. And we've seen some successes in that. We need more of that. We need more involvement. We need more engagement from the community. I'll just say that when the community does not accept this violence, it will go away. And we want to do everything we can to empower and support communities not to accept violence in their neighborhoods and communities. So I would just encourage you as council and the influence that you have and anybody that is watching here today to engage with us as a police department, engage with other organizations that are doing the work right now in the community. We have a phenomenal department here with the Office of Community Safety that is a supplement to the police department in addressing crime in the community. We have a model that will work. I know it will work. When we look at the last 2 weeks, there's a question is it working? Are we doing everything we need to do? I think we are. We were up in Washington, D.C. not 3 weeks ago. Chicago, Philadelphia, and the Greensboro Police Department were at the White House talking on a panel on Office of Community Violence and how do we address violence in our community. And we were an example for other communities across the country to look to how we're addressing violence. So I know we've seen a spike here recently, and in the last 2 weeks, to include one of our own officers. But I assure you, with that tragedy, our officers are working harder than ever to address violence in the community. We're continuing to connect with our community, and we would just ask for your help in whatever way possible to help us to continue forging those relationships and making those connections.
Chief, could you address staffing levels? I know that there is a concern out in the general community as far as GPD being understaffed, and I know that you have made tremendous strides. Could you address that?
Yeah, I will say I have not made those tremendous strides. I'll give all of that credit to council. When we had this issue, when we proposed some recommendations, council stepped up, increased that compensation and benefits to our officers. We are authorized 651 sworn police officers and 127 professional staff employees. Right now, we have 81, we say operational vacancies. That means there's 81 positions without a full-time officer, either in a street, as a detective, or in some assignment. But we have 30 that are currently being assigned out of field training, 27 in our academy, and we have 11 that are hired waiting for our next academy or in a lateral process. So we are right now hard vacancies at about 12 for the department. 12. And in comparison, I won't call out any other cities. There was a news article about another triad city that's struggling with nearly 100 vacancies in their organization. So this is not, it's very uncommon for us to have the staffing levels that we have.
And while you say we've got 12 hard vacancies, GPD, you have also instituted other programs to help bridge that gap. For instance, the civilian traffic enforcement. I believe that when you originally proposed that, it was estimated that it would be about 17,000 man-hours, police hours, that would be transferred to sworn people, and you've got the program up and running. And so that's about another 8 officers that no longer have to go out and write reports for accidents without physical injury. So that has also impacts your vacancy rating, because you're able to put people in a higher priority call. Additionally, the BHART team has been extremely successful, and what that has done is it has allowed police to leave a scene sooner than having to sit through and really do something that they're not trained to do when it comes to behavioral health or drug overdoses, to be able to hand it off to BHART, which is not, it's not actually funded through the police department. That is through the Office of Community Safety. So that has an impact too. When you take those things into consideration, we're probably just about even at this point. I would say you and I have had the conversation that maybe the sworn capacity needs to be larger because we've grown and we have more people coming in. And so I assume that in the next budget, you may come back to us with a larger sworn officer number. But we also have the grant that GPD in the city of Greensboro was able to secure, which maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, the grant that we were awarded was a COPS grant, and if you go back to the mid to late 90s, maybe early 2000, they had referenced them as Clinton COPS because of President Clinton at the time really pushed that program out. And so what that COPS grant allows us to do is to fund up to 30 positions where the federal government will pay for 75% of those positions for 3 years. And so, and I know we're getting into budget discussions, and I'm not going to step on city manager's toes with any of that. But that is a priority for us, because we know that as we continue, there are 2 priorities in our community. We see violent crime as a priority, but our community also has traffic concerns as a priority.
Absolutely.
And those 30 positions, if we're allowed to support those in our upcoming budget, would be directed towards those 2 priorities. That's what they would be, those positions would be utilized for. So that is a priority for us. I don't ever like to say we want to, the only way we can address things is through adding positions and adding people and throwing bodies at it. But I think we're working as smart and as hard as we ever have as an organization right now with our staffing, with the programs, with BHART, with GMAP, with our crime gun unit that was established. A lot of these things are really making us very effective.
And I do want to say, we just got the year-end statistics, and while the last 2 weeks have been horrific, year-to-date for 23 versus 24, homicides were down 42%. And I think we have to recognize that. Gun seizures are also, they were up 14%. GPD was able to get 1,769 guns off the street, which I think is a huge number. And there is another category called violent arrests, and I think that people misconstrue what that means. The violent arrest numbers were up 18%, and that's actually a good thing, because that means that GPD was able to make the case, file charges, and arrest the person. 18% more last year than the year before. It doesn't mean that there were more violent incidents. It means that they were able to make more arrests in relation to the incidents in 23 and 24. So I think it's people, when they look at that number and it says violent arrests, they automatically think that that means that the violence was up that much. And
No.
that was actually the closure rate.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that we can celebrate.
And I do want to make note of one thing. You know, we did have a reduction in homicides last year as opposed to the year before that. It's, in my mind, it's kind of hard to celebrate when you set a record and then you're lower the next year. But when you look at the number of homicides opposed to the last 6 or 7 years, we were still almost 20% below that average across the past 6 or 7 years, which is pretty significant. One thing we saw last year and we're working to address now is those the domestic violence homicides as well as aggravated assaults. That trend started 2 years ago. It continued last year. We're working with the Family Justice Center as well as evaluating all of our practices, policies, reporting procedures to make sure we're not missing some opportunity from a phone call about a domestic to any kind of an incident where we could provide some intervention to maybe drive those numbers down related to domestic violence. When you talk about end-of-year numbers from last year, we were up about 3% in our aggravated assaults. We were up almost 45% in domestic aggravated assaults, and that's what's really driving that number. So, and unfortunately, one of the last 4 homicides was actually domestic related. So that is something that we are looking at. When we have a spike in violence or a spike in crime, we look at trends, we look at what are driving those trends, we look at specific incidents, and so domestic violence is going to be an area that we focus on coming into this year.
Thank you.
And Chief, first, I just wanted to mention, you mentioned domestic violence, and I know how well you all work with the Family Justice Center. I'm on their executive committee, and we've just gotten a lot of reports about that, and we're trying to figure out what can we as the executive committee do to assist the Family Justice Center as well and all the organizations. And also, I want to say that Crime Stoppers is a good avenue. I'm also on the board of Crime Stoppers, and I'm advocates for those too because, as you said, we need the community to help. But my specific question for you is, what can we as a council do to help you now or in the very near future? What would help you the most?
I think as we come into the new budget year, my priority would be focused around those COPS positions and the opportunity that would allow us to expand in areas to, one, address violent crime, but also address what we have heard is overwhelmingly the number one concern from the community, and that's traffic.
Thank you.
I think we get a lot of questions about the visibility of officers. Will that help with that as well?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
So, Chief, when you talk about traffic, because I do hear a lot of people complaining that they don't see anybody, and so cars are running red lights like they're green now. And sometimes I'm sitting and I don't see anybody. So I know we've helped you add staff, and then they've added the traffic. Where are they? How are they situated? Where are they located? I mean, I'd like to see more. Certainly understand, the money, and that was important, and we did that. But I think it was to also make sure that we did fill those positions. Not that we want to oversaturate or over-monitor an area. People, we're not looking at monitoring just people, but in areas where people do want to feel safe.
Yeah, the car I drive is a Tahoe. It doesn't look anything like a police vehicle. And probably once a day I get my doors blown off by somebody speeding by me, running a red light, and so I see it out there. One thing we had to do as part of our strategy about 1.5 years ago is we had to shrink several of our discretionary units down so that those officers could fill the patrol function, because we needed to make sure when somebody called 911 that we were going to get an appropriate response. Our hope is with these 30 positions, we could supplement, create a second traffic squad and even a third traffic squad, which their only focus would be to be on the roadways enforcing traffic laws, being visible. And again, to your point, it's not about over-policing. Sometimes just stopping a car and letting them know that they're speeding raises that heart rate enough and teaches them a good enough lesson that changes behavior. Right now, our focus has been primarily on making sure we were appropriately staffed in patrol and then addressing violent crime. And we really, over the last year through our surveys, through our Zen City surveys, overwhelmingly the majority of feedback we get is traffic related. the only way we're going to change that behavior is to be visible and to be on the roadways enforcing those laws.
Yeah, because I think one of the most recent accidents where the guy was on the scooter, they say racing up and down Random Road, turned the corner, ran smack into the car. Rocky Knoll threw him about 40 feet. Probably just car riding up and down through there or riding there may have prevented it. Luckily, he didn't die, so I guess he's a Superman kind of person, thankfully. But those types of events I hear about a lot. And then the first question is, well, where's the police? And so y'all got them. So I want to just make sure that we focus on that, too. It's important. Like you say, maybe just a stop and, then send them on their way. Doesn't have to be a ticket, doesn't have to be any of that creates any kind of economic burden. But just awareness, I think, is very important. So how does the Real-Time Crime Center help you? Has that helped?
It will not really be a huge benefit as it relates to traffic enforcement because they're not visible in the community. They have been instrumental in how we're addressing violent crime. We tap into videos, not getting specific related to the homicides, but one of our recent homicides was captured on video in an apartment complex that is really what helped solve that case. So, and will make it a strong case. So we continue to grow in the Real-Time Information Center. We're adding new businesses, new apartment complex, new properties all the time. And again, it's not about what I think over policing. It's not about, more bodies necessarily. For me, it's working smart first, as well as working hard. And the Real-Time Information Center allows us to work smart, utilizing and leveraging technology to do that. So it wouldn't really help in the traffic area, but it absolutely helps in our violent crime.
Well, I think that's important, too. So, thank you. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief. I want to say a couple things. When you look at what we're seeing out there, there's no question, and Trey's heard from me, Andrea's heard from me, it's very concerning. Not just traffic. I basically drive Elm Street to my office, and there's typically a wreck every day. Cone and Elm is one of the worst. And I see that. But going back to the violent crimes and going back to the domestic disputes that you've seen, I want to make sure folks understand that GPD can't do all of that. And it's not all GPD's fault. It's part of an ecosystem. And when you have this ecosystem, when you arrest somebody, and an officer goes to the court, and the court doesn't punish them for the arrest that they did, that's a problem. I heard a case last week where a gentleman shot and killed a domestic partner, got 10 years, got out of jail that day, went to get another gun, and shot and killed somebody else. It's a court system, too. So we can have the best practices and the best police department in the world, but if the ecosystem is broken, and I submit to you that it is, that continues to hurt everything. And so I don't know, and Trey and I talked about this last week a little bit, about how do we work better with our court system? Because I can only imagine, I think about, if I was an officer and you had a great case, you put it forward, there's no question, and then the courts get lenient. Or just dismiss it when it's an obvious case. The fact that some folks that, have shot and killed people over 12 months ago haven't seen the light of day of a court, it's a problem. You can't even get domestic courts. Like, we've got to figure that system. It's not the city, and it falls on GPD, though, because it all ends up on y'all's lap. How many repeat offenders are making these cases? And you talk about arrest. The stated that I've seen that the person that killed Officer Haran was arrested 17 times. That doesn't mean he was put in jail. He was arrested and let go. He got out, only to do the ultimate disaster by killing a father.
I think Andrea wants to comment on that.
I don't think he had been arrested 17 times. He may have had some minor things in Wilmington, but nothing, not 17 arrests. And we had actually reached out to some other local agencies to see if he was under investigation for anything. It's my understanding he was not. I'll let the chief provide any additional comment on
I
that.
think that was a misreport.
I'll accept that. How many people that shot and killed somebody in 2024 had a previous record? Let's just state that.
I bet more than half.
I bet more than half. And maybe I picked the wrong example, but the example still exists. And I would argue that these domestic disputes, and maybe they don't end up, and I've said often that many of our criminals, many of our folks that are extremely violent, that want to shoot somebody, luckily for us, they're bad shots. Because we'd have a lot more homicides, because when we get those emails and it said non-life threatening, if they were good shots, we'd have more homicides. And so how many of those had previous records? So the court system, I want your officers to know that you are running best practices. You just gave an example of being in D.C. You have made arrests. You are working collaboratively with folks. Not only you think about, the person that was arrested 2 hours down the road, was it Johnston or Duplin County? And working and collaborating. So, I just want your women and men to know that it doesn't just fall on your shoulders. There's an ecosystem there from birth to existence. And if you're arrested and you do something, you get a slap on the hand or dismissed, and it comes back to y'all, and you keep arresting the same people. That's not fair to you. It's not fair to the community. And that's something that needs to be fixed.
And just about every judge ran unopposed.
It's unbelievable. And so you're addressing those violent crimes. It is systemic. Traffic, I remember how many, think about how many miles of streets we have in the city limits of Greensboro. And it's hard to have an officer on every street corner or on every street.
I think it's 1,200 miles.
I remember 15 years ago, probably, there was a person that on Elm Street, guy came out of the club, shot 4 times down February 1 Street, luckily didn't kill anybody, and an officer was on the opposite corner. So just because you are visible rarely means that somebody is going to pay attention. And so I just want you to know, I appreciate the job that you're doing. I am concerned. I am concerned about the violence. I don't think it's a Greensboro thing. I think it's a worldwide thing. I don't know how to stop it. I'm hoping you do. But I want you to know, and the women and men that work with you, to know that you have my unwavering support. And we'll do whatever we can as a body to support you, and just know that I know it doesn't fall just on GPD. So thank you and your team for everything you do.
Thank you, and just a brief comment. We're having those conversations now in the department about the court system and issues that we face with that, and we're having them as triad chiefs as well as across the state, because it is an issue that has really came out of George Floyd and COVID, and that pendulum swung so far one way, and now it's starting to swing back the other way in terms of accountability and how do we hold folks accountable. And I agree. I don't think we need to lock up the college kid who shoplifts. That's not an appropriate place for them to be. But I also don't think we should have somebody charged with homicide who's out on an ankle bracelet,
Right.
being monitored. I don't think that's
The
the
key word you
appropriate.
said, and I wrote it down, and I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see it, but it's accountability. We hold y'all accountable all the time. The citizens hold us accountable. We need to hold the court systems and the judge accountable. And the fact of that we got all these judges running unopposed. How about paying attention to them? So, thank you. Accountability is the key word.
And then the only other thing I will say is that the community is absolutely critical for us to be successful. And I've said this before in front of media and the community that we can't do it alone. We're not going to solve it alone as a police department, and the community's not going to solve it alone. The only way we're going to be successful is working together. I think we're getting there. I think we can be better working with our community, and that's what I really hope to see coming into this new year, is that we can build some better relationships. I don't think we're strained at all, but we need to empower our communities a little bit more as a police department. We need to make sure they know they're supported by us, that when they call us, we're going to respond and take their call seriously, that we're listening to them, that we're not in neighborhoods to over-police, that we're there to be smart, address those that are committing crimes in our communities and neighborhoods. And hopefully, as we continue to have those conversations, we continue to show up in spaces and meet with them, that relationship will continue to grow and build. And I think once we do that, I mean, the success will follow.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Chief, I join my fellow council members in saying that the news of the past 2 weeks has been very troubling. I also note that in the past, and even just now, you have stated that we're not going to be able to police our way out of the situation. You also shared a little earlier that, being more specific, so to speak, you talked about the Office of Community Safety, looking at the prevention, the intervention, the mitigation of. I believe that an enhanced investment in what those teams are doing, and I know sometimes there are some criticisms of those teams because it's very difficult to prove a negative. You know, just how impactful are they? You could say that the numbers we saw last year, those homicide numbers down some 40, 42%, were probably impacted by the work that they're doing. What is your thought about an increased investment in the work that those groups are doing? I know there are other things going on. There's BHART and there's traffic safety and the staffing. But as far as those groups and getting to the core issues, getting to the preventative side of it, not necessarily the symptomatic side of it, but the preventative side of it, what would an increased investment, or could you use an increased investment in those organizations?
Absolutely. You know, before Letitia was ever in her role over the Office of Community Safety, we were having conversations of what that office and department could look like and how they could support the police department in our efforts. And I 100% stand behind her and support the efforts that are coming out of that office. And I will go back to the panel we were on at the White House some 3 weeks ago. And I tell folks about that, and it's kind of funny because they're like, you have Chicago, Philadelphia, and then Greensboro. And it's not related to the violent crime that's occurring in those cities. It's related to the innovation that's occurring in those cities and the programs specifically tied to an Office of Community Safety, how you're trying to address crime, not through only an enforcement model, but through getting into communities, utilizing communities to address crime. And that's just something that it's new across the country. And I do believe in it. I do believe it can be successful. So, you know, whatever investment is needed to support that, I would absolutely support that. And I just think that it's so new that it's hard to know how successful it can be. But I completely believe in the philosophy of it and support that program fully.
Okay. Chief, thank you very much, and we look forward to those budget discussions.
Thank you.